January is a month where movies go to die, as I always like to say, and February isn't typically that much better. It's going to start to pick up this week. You got Captain America. It's an MCU film that just has not gotten a lot of early praise from the people that have actually gotten to see it,
Oh
and so
gosh.
I'm still looking out for. I mentioned this last week, but I'm still holding out hope for Paddington in Peru. That's like one of the only
Yes.
family kids movies that seems like it might actually have something going on for it. But
Hmm.
luckily, we have the classics that we can go back to, and there's a couple of shows, at least one especially, that I may have talked about before, but it's worth repeating and worth bringing up again. So I do have a few recommendations this week for the good people.
Excellent. All right, let's do it.
Absolutely. So starting off with the one movie recommendations, going to make up for some TV show recommendations in the past. So the first one is, and I don't know if I mentioned this before or not, but it really is just a solid film, The Lion King, the
Oh
1993,
yeah.
1994 original animated, actually animated
Hmm.
movie, and not the so-called live action 2019 edition, which
Yeah.
is also animated, but it when you make a hyper realistic animal, it means that the animal cannot show emotion. And so when
Yeah,
the
that's the thing. I just don't. Yeah,
yes,
you'd think
it's
they'd know that. I
yeah,
mean, it's
exactly.
Disney.
You would
Gosh.
think you would think, but no, they're like, let's spend way too much money on visual effects that no matter how great they look, will never be able to defeat the uncanny valley and are just
Mm,
not going to end up being worth it in the long run because there are no emotions on the animals' faces. But luckily, the classic animated film, the hand-drawn animated film, has y'all covered there because all those animals are cartoons, and so they can fully emote. They've got great voice acting to boot, and it
right.
was just a reminder of a much simpler and much more fun time in the Disney lexicon, in the Disney history, in the Disney vault, as they used
Hmm.
to actually know and care something about. So I recommend it. It's especially a great film about family, about the relationship between a father and son. It definitely does have a couple moments in there that might be a little bit too scary for the kids. Scar can be a little bit scary from time to
Yeah.
time.
Hmm.
The song Be Prepared has that element. And of course, Mufasa and the fate that Mufasa faces is one where, yeah, watching with my son, it was a whole new experience. I started crying. It's like
Yeah.
I've always been touched by that moment. But when you're actually watching that moment with your son and you're like, oh, my
Yeah.
boy, like I just,
It's a whole
I
different thing.
a
Yeah.
whole new emotional reaction to that sequence. But it's one where, again, I think that they did it right though, because as low as you feel at that moment, guess what the next sequence is? It's Timon and Pumbaa, and it lifts your spirits
Oh,
right
that's
back up. And
great.
it's like, yes, they perfectly timed that, and clearly we're like, yeah, let's lift the spirits up of these people since we're clearly dropping a bomb on any families that might be going, and their parents
Right.
like sobbing, like, oh my child, no.
Exactly. Oh
Yes.
man.
So, yeah, Lion King, great film. I give that film a 9 out of 10. Solid, solid classic film there. And great score to boot. And then I got a couple of classic animated cartoons to recommend, but the one that's still going on, and I'm pretty sure I've recommended this one before, but it might have been in like the early days. But it's the show Bluey, and it's
Oh
really
yes.
probably one of the only great kid shows that's currently running.
Hmm.
And it started back in 2018. It's now gone on 3 seasons. They were able to have a last episode of their third season be like almost like a 45, 60-minute episode, which for a show that is typically an usually 8-minute episode, is a very impressive thing for them
Oh
to be able to
gosh.
actually
Yeah, you're
pull that
right.
off. And
Hmm.
to have the narrative structure maintain, and it still feels just like the regular, every other episode of the show. It's great. It's a great story about family. It's about, hey, here's how you can have fun, play with your kids, and kids enjoy it because it's silly. But parents can enjoy it too. It's one of those shows that's interesting because as much as kids enjoy it, parents might enjoy it that much more. And it's a
Oh
show
yeah.
that my wife and I have been like, yeah, I would watch this show on my own.
Yeah.
Like it's just that's how wholesome it is, and that's just how well done it is.
Yeah,
So,
we don't even have kids, but when we
hmm
have it on for like kids, our friends' kids or
hmm
whatever, I mean it's good.
it
Like
is.
I yeah, it's good. Just
Yes,
for
it's
adults or kids or anybody, really.
yes, and there's a good reason why Disney Plus has nothing going for it right now, but because they got the distribution rights to show and to stream that in the United States and North America, they have gotten a lot of subscriptions because of that one show, a show that they did not create, that they had no hand in creating whatsoever, but Clearly, a very and the fact also the story behind it of it was a show that was made because there's a certain amount of money that Australia sets aside for Australian content. And so, like, they just
Oh, okay.
happened to, like, it was one of these happenstance things where the people they decided to hire on to make a show ended up having a really great idea and it caught on really well. But this is a homegrown property from Australia because of tax-paying dollars over there.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know that.
Yeah. And that's why it's a great show, though. I mean, it just everything about it. 9.5 out of 10 for me as a show. It's
Hmm.
really just one of the best out there. And then the two classic shows that I would recommend, and these are pretty easy to find these days, and you can find them I think on DVD and Blu-ray disc pretty cheap these days too. Is Batman the Animated Series. This one probably much more for like older teens. It's much more appropriate for
Hmm.
teens, older teens. It's Batman, but it honestly it teaches you so much about the lore. It's very comic accurate from people that I've talked to who've talked the comics. It also introduced the character of Harley Quinn, who apparently had not been a comic character and was introduced in the show. Was so popular that they decided to put her into the comics.
Oh, wow. I didn't
When
know
this was
that.
going on. Yeah, so back in the 90s, it was a huge thing. So again, fascinating. And it's again a show that I think holds up really well, and I think that it's one that a lot of older members of the family, older teens especially, will find a lot of enjoyment in. And it's for a cartoon especially, it holds up really, really well in that regard. So solid show, 9 out of 10. And then Animaniacs, gotta throw in a more wacky kids
Yes.
movie or wacky kids show in there. But what I
They
love
were a
about it,
bunch of weirdos,
oh,
those
they were so
Animaniacs.
weird. So
But in
weird
the best way.
in the best way. And again, there's so many jokes in there that are just going to go right over their heads. And you look back on you and say, how did they get away with that? Because parents are going to get that and be like, oh my goodness. But the kids, again, they're not going to know anything. That's when comedy was at its best, right? But I think the thing, or the reason why I really want to talk about this show is because there's also songs in the show. And it's actually a
Hmm.
great way to learn countries and to learn states and things like that because they've actually got Wacko, Yakko, whichever one's doing it is, listing off all the countries of the world. And it's
Hmm.
also a bit of a time capsule because it's when some countries were still around that are not necessarily around anymore. So
Right. Yeah.
would recommend both of those shows, but Animaniacs if you're looking for a show for younger kids.
Excellent. All right. Is that your Your
Those are my
recommendations?
recommendations and picks of the week.
Excellent. All right. Odin's TV and movie picks of the week. Thank you so much, Odin. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. See you next week.